Okay, so just to kind of give you an idea, all right, we're going to kind of think this through. All right, let's say that we have a goal of eliminating the budget deficit. Okay? The United States owes a lot of money. Sorry if that's news to anybody listening to this, right? The United States has a huge amount of debt. Okay? And ideally we'd pay it off, but the first step has to be to stop borrowing more. Right? Before we can ever think about paying down the debt, we need to stop adding to the debt. Okay? So our goal is to figure out how to reduce the budget deficit to zero. Okay? We just want to get to the point where we are not borrowing money anymore. We're only spending money that we actually have. Okay? Now, that's not going to be our only goal, okay, in that circumstance. What else might we care about that would be relevant? I mean, we certainly don't, for example, want to crash the economy in the process of doing this, right? There's lots of ways that we want to make sure we're not causing harm to people. So, we could simply say, okay, we're not going to provide any benefits to anybody anymore. That would drastically reduce the amount of money the federal government spent, but there's all sorts of harm that would be caused by doing that, which we probably want to avoid, or at least minimize, okay? We want to keep our jobs. Right? Whether I'm president, whether I'm serving in Congress, right? I want to make sure that the net result of this is not that voters are biting, are chomping at the bit to throw me out of office the first chance they get because they're so mad about what I did. All right, so I have a number of goals actually that I want to achieve here, right? One very main one that's very specific to what we're talking about, but I have these secondary goals that are also important. All right, so we got to think about alternatives, okay? And I'm just going to put this in very broad terms for our purposes, okay? So we could increase taxes to generate more revenue to cover all of our expenses. We could cut our spending. Okay, so we reduce the amount of money that we're spending below the amount of, or equal to the amount that we're actually bringing in. Or we just print money. Right, we're up to $38 trillion or whatever in debt, so we just set the printers going. Right, we print $38 trillion, right? Pay off all of our debt, right? Good to go, right? Or at least just print off whatever extra money we need. So, okay, this year we're going to spend an extra $1 trillion over what we're bringing in. We'll just print $1 trillion. Good to go, right? Okay, so we got to think about the benefits of each of those, right? So we raise taxes, we're going to bring in more revenue, which means that we're still going to be able to afford to do a lot of things that we want to do, right? We're not going to have to make cuts to programs. Okay. Of course, there's all sorts of different ways that we could raise taxes, different tax brackets, different distributions of those taxes. There's lots of different ways that we could think about this. So in the real world, this would be a much more complex question than just raise taxes or not, right? We can think about how we're going to raise taxes, which taxes, etc. All right? But that could certainly be a benefit, right, of pursuing that, right? We don't have to make tough choices about where to cut spending. We don't have to cut people off from benefits that we may think are valuable, services that we think are valuable that government provides, right? We're just going to bring in more income to cover that, right? If we cut spending instead, right, well, we're not going to have to take more money from people, okay, that could cause hardship to people if we're taking more money from them. It could certainly cause political hardship to us if people are mad that we're taking more of their paychecks. And so we won't have to worry about that. We think about just printing money. Well, man, we're trying to avoid all hard choices here, right? We're not going to ask you to put more of your paycheck in. We're not going to cut any of the programs that you want, right? We are just going to generate more money for ourselves by printing it. All right, but what about the costs on each of these? Again, I'm kind of keeping it very simple here, right? All right, so we raise taxes to reduce the budget deficit. We've already got those political costs I mentioned, right? People may be mad that we have made those or increased their taxes and we're taking more of their paychecks. We also might slow down the economy by raising taxes. So if more money goes to the government to pay for services it's already providing, right? We're just not borrowing to get that, to provide those services. That's less money for people to invest in new businesses, in new equipment, in hiring new people, etc. We could slow the economy down. Okay, if we're going to cut services, cut spending, okay, people who are going to be affected by those cuts are not going to be happy with us. And so politically, that could be costly to us. Okay, and we could cause harm to people depending on which particular services, which particular benefits that we cut. Cutting government spending can also slow down the economy because again, we're pulling money out of the economy. We're not bringing in that money that we're borrowing and putting it into our economy. Instead, we're just cutting back so we can slow the economy. So that's got some costs. All right, what about just printing money? Well, if you thought we had inflation over the last few years, just wait. We're going to get huge inflation if we do that. And so the money that you may bring home the same amount in your paycheck that you might be getting the same benefits from the government that you were getting, but that money is worth a lot less than it was. And so it becomes harder for people to pay the bills, and it becomes harder for us to keep our jobs. So now we face this difficult, then we got to think about the likelihood of getting them through, right? Well, in this case, first of all three would have to be done through the law, right? Can't just issue an executive order to raise taxes, can't just issue an executive order to cut spending, can't just issue an executive order to print more money. So then we have to think about, well, who controls Congress? Is that majority in Congress going to be more favorable to one of these ideas or another? So if you have, for example, a solid Democratic majority in Congress, you're probably going to have an easier time getting increased taxes through. If you have a solid Republican majority in Congress, you're probably going to have an easier time getting getting spending cuts through. Probably not going to get just printing money through Congress, but maybe. All right, so we got to think about the likelihood of it. And then we have to think about the likelihood that each will actually succeed if enacted. So for example, if we raise taxes to bring in more revenue, but we do so in a way that causes the economy to crash, that could actually cause revenues to go down, and then we're worse off than we were to start with. Right? We cut spending in order to bring the economy or the budget into balance, but by doing so we cause the economy to crash, and we actually end up getting less revenue, so we don't end up balancing the budget, right? And so then we have to think, well, okay, if this is our goal, right, and these are our options, how do we choose among them? And it's going to depend on kind of what we think would actually be most likely to work, what we think would be the greatest benefit, what would be the greatest harms, greatest costs that are caused. And we're not going to necessarily all agree on what those rank orderings are, what we should value most, right? But it's going to be putting that together. But you can see in that particular case, right, it's not like we went through an analysis that led to one obvious, easy solution. Aha, anybody coming through thinking about this in a rational way is automatically going to say we need to do X, right? Instead, what you are, I think, very likely to get, which is we have gotten, which is people who say, I don't know, let's throw up our hands and not do it, right? And so we haven't really taken serious action to do it because there are significant costs to all of them, right? And those costs have been valued higher than the benefits that we get from balancing the budget. But it's an idea of kind of not just the process, but the challenges that are often involved in trying to use that process to generate your best solution, your best decision. All right, questions about that? Okay, so for Wednesday, I want to make sure that you read the chapter from Kingdon that's posted on Blackboard. And we're going to talk about garbage cans and policy streams, okay? Which is how Kingdon describes part of what actually happens in the policy-making process, okay? Which is going to look very different from what we've described today. All right, but we'll stop there for now, and we'll pick up with that on Wednesday.